optimism, resilience under fire, courage, the willingness to keep going against all odds. Those are things that we normally highlight as being characteristics of the great leaders and the people that we admire, just even in our regular lives. And there's a reason for that, because those kind of characteristics in the right circumstances can move mountains. They can make incredible things happen. They have vision to see things that others can't, and are unwilling to let anything get in the way. And then they have, through willpower, they can push things through. We've seen it all the time in our history, even. And I mean, it's part of the spirit that made America from the beginning and has kept America great in many cases. But it's crucial that those characteristics be grounded in some level of reality, and so that what the thing that you're pursuing is at least possible, even if it's only in a theoretical position. Even if the chances might not be that great, there are still valid chances and valid reasons for that to go on and for you to pursue that outcome. That's when it's a good thing. When in those underlying capacities don't exist, when there isn't a chance for the thing you're pushing for to come to materialize, then those characteristics turn from something great to something dangerous. And especially if the person having that is the leader of a country, or the leaders or of a certain country that's next to them or that's alongside with them, it gets dangerous for their people as well. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out in Ukraine right now. Now, first of all, we're going to start off with the president himself, President Zelensky, and then we're going to see how he's not the only one that has these negative characteristics. And then we're going to see how this is all playing out in real life and how it's impacting on the people in Ukraine and on even American national security interests. So first, let's start with President Zelensky, who a few days ago said this.
All leaders and international organizations must respond to Russia's actions. And the response must be tough. Putin does not want any peace. He only wants war and death. He does not care whom he kills. The main goal is to destroy. First Ukraine and Ukrainians, and then you, dear partners. That is why it is a matter of survival, and not only for Ukraine, that the world reacts to Russian evil and exerts pressure and hits back.
Now, certainly, as we say every time, from Ukraine's perspective, you can totally understand why he would call Putin evil. The things that he's done, he's invaded his country. So many people have been killed. So much of his cities have been destroyed. There's no question about it. From their perspective, that's exactly true. But the perspective is not right when he talks about you, dear partners, that your future is at risk, that your security is at risk, that if he doesn't stop here, he's coming for you next. We've talked many times how that's a physical impossibility, no matter what Russia wanted to do. If they just had some maniacal desire to try and do something to the harm, they have nuclear weapons which can reach out to all of us, and they're not going to do that. They never have, and they're not going to now. Conventionally, they don't even have the capacity to do so. So he's wrong on that, but he's trying to convince you, and he's trying to convince his partners that that's the case, so that they keep giving him money to continue to try, and weapons and ammunition to continue his war, because he doesn't want to accept the ground truth that the war is unwinnable, that he can't continue on. He's going to continue to press that way. That's when exuberance and commitment can become fatal, because already people are paying with their price, paying the price with their lives in support of something that can't be militarily attained. That's the hard, unpleasant, ugly truth of this, is that no matter what, quote, right looks like, no matter who should or shouldn't have invaded Ukraine and what all things led to that. And you see, we've been talking in recent episodes about that this was 15 years in the making. And we had no small amount of culpability in setting the stage for that, and could have turned this off at any case, at any point, but we never did. Well, now that it's way beyond the point where it should have already been turned off, and every day that goes forward from here where we don't do what makes sense, where we don't seek the militarily attainable, or at least recognizing where those limits are, and then using diplomacy to try to end the threat and end the risk to everybody, to include the Ukrainians, we're just going to get more people killed, because that's just how things are going to unfold. That's just how it works when you remain blind to reality. Unfortunately, it's not just the leader of Ukraine that's suffering from this. Many Russian American leaders are as well. And part of them are just kind of duped because they hear a story they don't know much about the situation, the circumstances, like what we talk about here on this channel all the time. And so they just repeat what they say because it sounds kind of right, as this representative does here and explained a couple of days ago why he thinks we need to keep giving money to Ukraine.
The cost of inaction will be 100 times higher if we hand over Ukraine to Russia. Our taxpayers will be spending 100 times more than this price tag to contain an aggressive Russia around the globe.
See, he's buying into that fiction that Ukraine is the only thing holding back Russia, that there's like, they got their hand on the dike, and if they fall, the whole thing's going to collapse and Russia's going to come rolling to the West. And of course, that's just not going to happen. But you see, he keeps telling his constituents that. And that actually, that quote there from Rep. Nickel was taken at a rally where, all of the people from his state were wanting to help people from Ukraine. Was certainly valid idea that you want to help the people from Ukraine, but it's so ironic, if not perverse, that the very thing that could help them the most is what we're not wanting to do at all, and that is to stop the war and seek a negotiated settlement. Now, it's not surprising that a lower level Democratic leader like Rep. Nickel is making these statements when he sees the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, saying things like this.
They're fighting for their democracy and fighting for our democracy. We need to send the resources to the Ukraine. And I want the people to know that Russia has been very evil, whether it's kidnapping children, raping women, killing families, and all the rest. But also, their army is bigger now than it was when it went into Ukraine. They are building, using money from people who are escaping sanctions and the rest. And getting help from Iran and from China and other places to build their technology. So we'll win in Ukraine. We must. We have to send the money. We must.
It's so ironic because, like I'm about to show you a clip from the Republican side with Rubio, she's starting to come to realize that things are not as good as what they've been told all the time. And she's actually accurate in some of those things she's talking about, but it's just kind of like dystopian and disconnected from reality when you hear the things she's saying. And then the conclusion she comes at the end, which is that we'll win. So she correctly points out that Russia is now colluding directly with North Korea, with Iran. Has given them lots of drones, drone technology, and now longer and medium range missiles that are being used at the front already. North Korea has given Russia 1 million shells this year alone, which is nearly as much as all the West has given to Ukraine from the beginning, or at least something close to that, at least in the same time period. That's on top of what Russia's already building. She also correctly pointed out that the Russian army is bigger now than it was, considerably bigger, hundreds of thousands bigger. This war started, you may recall, with 200 and some odd thousand Russians surrounding the outsides of Ukraine, and then they invaded in February 2022. Today, by most estimates, there are approximately 600,000 Russian soldiers inside Ukraine. That's not even talking about the size of their full army, because it's bigger than that, because they've got other parts of their country that they have to defend, and they have troops all over the place. But there are now triple the number that started inside there in the country itself, just in that sliver of Ukraine, which just goes to show you how insanely impossible it is to suggest that the Ukraine side is going to now be able to extricate and push out a force that's 3 times bigger than the one that invaded initially. And of course, that doesn't even talk about the increased capacity in their ability to manufacture weapons, artillery shells, even tanks, airplanes, missiles, all of these things that they're continuing to do, ramping up everything into the highest degree, and the manpower that they continue to roll in, upwards of 15 to 20,000 per month. They continue to add on to that. And then after laying all that correctly out, her conclusion, of course, Ukraine's going to win. But what's missing, she lays out the case for why the Russians are going to win, does not lay out anything for why Ukraine is going to win, except they're just myopic focus on getting that money out. Now, it's not just the Democrats. I'm just not just beating up on the Democrats, because the Republicans have some of the same issues. And again, you're seeing a little bit of movement here, and I'm hoping to ooch this along would you see that Senator Rubio is making some progress, but he's still missing the boat.
There is no way that the Russian Federation takes Ukraine, all of Ukraine, half of Ukraine, and that was Putin's goal from the beginning, was to carve it up into at least half the country, including Kyiv. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. On the other side of it, we have the reality of it is that Ukraine is small compared to Russia in terms of size and its ability to bring scale, its ability to force conscript people. So neither I'm just being honest. And you know, in the past, I have tried not to talk about this publicly because I thought it undermined the leverage that Ukraine had. But now it's the reality. Neither side is going to be able to achieve victory as defined in the most idealistic terms.
You know, the really odd thing about that the rest of that interview there that was on Fox News, similar to the Nancy Pelosi dystopian, is that he again laid out a very rational reason why the Russian side is growing and why Ukraine can't win the war. And then instead of coming to the natural conclusion, which is actually what I expected him to say, I expected him to say, Ukraine can't win the war, so let's push for a negotiated settlement. Instead, he just said, so we need to help Ukraine, just kind of like Pelosi did. They need the money. Let's give them some money and continue on. But that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, he's also inaccurate in his first estimate that Russia can't win. The only way you come to the conclusion that Russia can't win is if you literally pay no attention to what's going on the ground, to what's going on in the Russian military industrial capacity, with the growth of the size of their army, with their arsenal, the comparative disadvantage in the air defense, artillery, armor, every capacity is in Russian side now. And I'm going to show you a clip of a video earlier today by Alex from History Legends, who we've had on our show before. Definitely recommend you go to his channel and watch this new video, because it's like all of his stuff. It's in many ways the most accurate piece of intelligence you can get anywhere, because he has no agenda. He doesn't work for anybody else. He doesn't get paid by any group to say anything. He just says what's true. And he has got one of the best track records of anybody out there, on whether it's a big company, a big organization, or a YouTube channel. He's been pretty good. And let me show you, you'll actually see a bit of why he's so right in this clip from his video earlier today.
And the most problematic for Ukraine right now is Avdiivka, because let me tell you, they're facing a girthy Russian offensive. Since the city fell, enemy forces have been building up on their latest successes. And now the Russians have achieved a hat trick with the capture of the settlements of Stepove, Lestochkine, and Svierne. By the way, that's exactly what we expected last video. The first step could be to clear this Orlivka salient, push the front line a couple kilometers. Now Ukraine is throwing everything they have to hold this line.
You know, one of the things that really stood out to me in Alex's discussion today about what happened, or what's going on the ground, is that the Ukraine side, despite the realization that this can't be won, are fighting absolutely tenaciously. And they're doing everything in their power. They're launching defensive counterattacks. They're trying to push Russia back. But you see the onslaught from the Russian side is just too great. And so they continue making these big pushes. You see now, much bigger than they've made earlier this year. And in fact, even the last 4 or 5 months combined, the gains now are getting faster and faster. And there's 2 big reasons for that. Well, 3 really. Number one is from the Ukraine side, they're getting weaker. They can't replace their casualties. They're trying these mass mobilizations, but they can't even get the law set right now. They don't have enough money to even pay them. So they're having a huge problem in being able to mobilize. And of course, they're also having a problem getting people to actually show up and not run away. And you've probably seen many of the videos where they are literally beating up people for trying to get away from them, to try to get them to mobilize, but they're not getting enough of them in any case. So they don't have reserves that they can move around when they start having penetrations. They're also tired. They don't get rotated off the front lines. So they're getting psychologically tired, physically tired. And now then you see it's pushing back. That's one reason. Second reason is that the Russian army is now increasing its use of air power, especially in that they're getting these, what they call FAB bombs, which is basically old-fashioned bombs that have been outfitted with glide capacity so that it can be a precision weapon now. And Russia is just ramping up big time the use of these. And Ukraine has no answer for it. They don't have any air defense that can stop these things, and it's just incredibly powerful. We're talking 500-pound bombs, FAB 500s, 250s, and a couple of 1500s. So these are massive aerial ordnance, and they're being launched from 40, 50 kilometers away, beyond what the Ukraine side can knock down. Even if they had the F-16s, which apparently are going to be in the air within months from now, it's not going to make any difference because you can't reach them that far. That's the second reason. The third reason is important as any reason, is because Russia is now showing that they are really figuring out how to do combined arms operations, at least at the tactical level. They have been using infantrymen, armored infantry vehicles to be able to storm, artillery, and then the air power. And they're coordinating all of these. And even with on the ground, they're coordinating multiple axes of advances into various organizations, into various targets and on the ground, objectives, cities, some of these things, where the enemy or the Ukraine side is. They're showing an increasing sophistication in how they're conducting these operations, and there's every reason to expect that they're going to continue. Because see, what Russia did is different from what the Ukraine side did, is that they actually took a lot of people out of contact, and for a long time went through lots of training for them, both at the individual and at the unit level. So they had lots of training outside of contact, while they had a separate unit that was still doing these, slow offensive operations, what they had been doing for months. Now that all the lessons that they learned from the front line are being sent back and taught to the new soldiers and the new troops, which also were staffed with some of the senior leader positions from other people that have experience and have training. So that's one of the big things I've been harping on from the beginning, that the Ukraine side doesn't have. Russia is at least trying to build that up over time by protecting some of their leaders, training them up without having to do it under fire. And now then they're bringing them in where they have the experience from people who have done it under fire, along with the newly trained people. And at least at this point, it's starting to be pretty effective. Now, as we're actually going to try and have Alex on later this week. We're trying to find the date we can make that happen right now, and he'll talk more about this. But part of the problem is that the Ukraine side did not do what the Russians did prior to last summer's offensive, which is spend at least a half a year, and in some cases 9 months, putting an enormous premium on building defensive lines. And it's been talked about a lot during that summer offensive that Russia had in some places 5 belts of defenses that were all extremely well dug in, lots of engineering equipment, lots of gear and physical materials that could withstand the bombardment so that the soldiers could be protected. And Ukraine never penetrated the first one. They got up to the first of these 5, never went beyond it because Russia had spent so much time. Ukraine didn't do that. Last September, October, I remember us seeing some of these things. Apparently, former Commander Zelensky recognized that the offensive had failed, and it's not. I mean, he naturally knows, because he knows just basics of combat, that the enemy is going to counterattack. So Russia endured their offensive, and then they had been preparing another offensive, and now he knew it was coming. So he knew it was time to stop the offensive that didn't work, start digging in right then. That's what he should have done. That's what he tried to do, but Zelensky said no. Zelensky didn't want to do that because he thought it would send the wrong signal. So instead, he kept the fiction up that they're going to keep it offensive. And so they did. They continued trying these offensive all the way up until like December or January in some places. Only then did they start thinking about defensive. Well, now then you see that they're paying the price for that. So after they thought that their defense would hinge on Avdiivka, so they didn't want to give that up, but they also didn't spend much time building subsequent lines. Now, in the last couple of months, they've started to, but now then they're finding that trying to withdraw back to those lines is being very, very difficult because they don't have good defenses in. They're not as, well constructed as the Russian side. They don't have engineering equipment very much, and they just didn't put the priority on it. Now then they're scrambling to try to do it, but it could be too late because there's just not, it takes time to do these things. Some things can't be rushed. You can't, facilitate things and define shortcuts and still have the same output. It just doesn't work that way in real life. But you see a developing theme here, is that whether it's the Ukraine people or the American people, there's lots of people who want to wish things away. And even though I see these things developing here, I don't like that outcome. So I'm just going to pretend that that's not the outcome. But look, on top of all the things we talked about here, there's the bigger issues of the manpower issue. It bears repeating because it is so crucial to understand. Russia has at least 5 times the population from which to draw. Because Russia is being successful, success breeds success. Everybody understands that. Whether you talk about a basketball game, a football game, a business environment, success breeds success. And when the Russians see that they're succeeding on the battlefield, when they know what's happening in the development, now then they don't have to force mobilize people like they did when they pulled 300,000 in the fall of 2022. Now the people are joining willingly. They're offering them all kinds of benefits, but they're showing up knowing that they're going into combat to the tune of 15 to 20,000. And in 1 month, apparently they got 30,000 people signing up. So they're volunteering to go fight, whereas the Ukraine side is running from the battle because they view it as a death notice when they get a mobilization order. So you see that even aside from the numbers being out of whack, it's the quality of those numbers is also just continuing to tilt up in Russia's favor. You have the inadequate equipment from the Ukraine side. You don't have the ability to maintain what even they have. So by some reports, up to 30% of all the equipment that the West gave Ukraine in 2023 is out of action, not because it got destroyed in combat, but because it's mechanically fallen apart and they don't have the capacity to rebuild it. There was a report out 10 days or so ago, I think, where Ukraine had resorted to going to a lot of the destroyed artillery pieces and howitzers to basically take parts off of them that weren't blown up so that they could get other ones back up, because they had to cannibalize what they had. They just don't have enough gear and they don't have the capacity under the normal cases to fix them. So you see, that's going to continue to degrade over time. And of course, there are lots of combat losses. One of the things that was also interested in Alex's video is that he shows a couple of situations where the Russians in these advances have also suffered large-scale equipment losses. There was like 25 vehicles, I think, in one of the scenes in one of the areas of the battle, which is a huge loss. And who knows how many people went along with that. But, you know, it's not like the Russians are just rolling over the Ukraine side. They're still fighting really hard. But the problem is that Russia has that equipment. They can replace that. They have the maintenance systems in their processes within their country. It's part of their army. So they have the spare parts. They have the raw materials. They can replace these. They have factories that can fix things, put them back to the front. Ukraine doesn't have that. So everything you want to look at is working against them. And this whole issue, which you heard nearly all the congressmen talk about, is this money that's allegedly being held up, not allegedly, that is being held up for Ukraine. But they all have this unsubstantiated belief that somehow that $60 billion is going to magically change everything. That all of these things that I just talked about, all these imbalances that are in Russia's favor, will somehow be reversed if only Ukraine gets that $60 billion. And folks, I mean, they need to pull out a calculator or something and just understand what that buys and what it can. It's like saying, hey, I got $50 cash here. I'm going to go buy a house. Well, I don't care if you want to buy a house. A house doesn't cost $50. You're going to have, you know, a large income and a hefty payment for your mortgage bill. You can't just get it because you want it. You know, if you have a job that's making $50,000 and you're barely making your rent payments and food payments, you can't say, I'm going to move into a 5-bedroom home in a rich part of town. It doesn't matter what you want to do. You can't afford it. That's how it works here. So getting this $60 billion is the equivalent of having $50 and wanting to buy a house, because there's not just like, I say this, and I just don't know why they can't get it. It's not like there's these warehouses filled with artillery pieces, tanks, missiles, artillery shells, and only the fact that the U.S. is not giving this money is preventing all that from going on. And if it does, then bam, all that stuff is going to rush to the front. They're going to roll up in there, and now all of a sudden they're going to start winning. That's not how war works, folks. If those vehicles were, well, first of all, there are some of those vehicles. Let me point of clarification here. We do still have a lot of vehicles in our inventory and in our army for our army, as does all of our Western allies in Europe. They have them. Nobody wants to give them up. And why would they? When they see that everything we gave, all the thousands of vehicles that the U.S. and Western European countries, and we're talking Bradleys, M1 tanks, Abrams, Challengers, AMX-10s from France, the Leopards from Germany, top-notch stuff. They've seen all of that go in, and they've seen it all burn up on the battlefield. They saw that it didn't do anything in the offensive last year. Where is my motivation for any one of these countries, and this should include the U.S., to say, okay, $200 billion in all of our vehicles did nothing in 2023. Why do I want to throw more of it into the destructive fields of the battlefield and our money just down a drain when it didn't work before? And now then the balance of power is far worse for Ukraine than it was then. You see, logically, rationally, any way you want to look at it, this war needs to come to an end. And it's another frustrating thing to me that so many of these American Congress people that we've talked about, or pundits on television, they somehow think that, and they actually say that Congress needs to come up with this money because otherwise Ukraine's going to lose. Zelensky has even said that a couple of times. As have some others, that if the Congress doesn't give this money, Ukraine's going to lose. Well, hang on a second. Let's look at that. Is the United States the only maker of weapons and the only holder of money in the world? Seems like there's a 32-member NATO alliance and a bunch of countries in the European Union. Why can they not give that? Why can like 5 or 6 of the countries, the richest ones, Germany, France, Italy, the UK, whoever, why can't they come together and say, well, here, take our $60 billion? Well, they already gave $50 billion. Yeah, that's over a 4-year period, folks. And that's not even hardly going for those things. But if it's truly in their interest to do it, then another $60 billion would be nothing. So it doesn't just have to come from America. There are plenty of others it could come from. But folks, there's a reason why no one else is ponying that money up. There's a reason why nobody else is throwing their tanks into the graveyard, because they realize how futile it is, and they don't want to waste their resources because they want to be able to maintain their own national defense, which is wise and reasonable. That's what we ought to be doing. But you see, every way you want to look at this, it just doesn't make any sense what these people are saying. And it's just so frustrating for me to see this lack of ability or unwillingness to just see things the way they are. There's nothing like brilliant about what I'm talking about here. You don't have to be a 20-year combat veteran to be able to see these things and add, to be able to read a little bit about military history and understand how national military power is built. You don't have to be an expert at this. It's logical, it's rational, it's basic understanding. And they should be able to get this, but somehow they're not. Because look, here's what's going to happen. I saw in the paper today earlier that the House of Representatives is trying to come up with some sort of compromise plan with the Senate. Maybe instead of 60 billion, it's 47 billion or something like that. And instead of the Senate bill, which doesn't include anything for the border security, they'll add something in conference so that we'll come together and they'll be able to pass something. Most likely that's going to be what's going to happen. But look, they are going to be shocked, I guess, when this money does come, and it won't make any difference in the outcome. It won't change the battlefield dynamics. I'll point blank categorically go, this is being recorded and it will be out there forever, and we will never pull this down, that $60 billion will not change the outcome on the battlefield. Then what are these people going to say? I want to put them on record too. Then what, Secretary or Nancy Pelosi? Then what, Senator Rubio? What happens if you get the money, they give it, and it doesn't change the dynamics on the battlefield? I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to ask for more. It's never going to be enough. Well, now we need 100 billion. Now we need 120 billion. I mean, the number will just keep growing, and it'll be the same argument. We can't let Russia win. We have to keep going. No, we don't have to do anything. We should do what makes sense, which is why the best thing for America, the best thing, ironically, for the people of Ukraine is to recognize reality now before another man dies unnecessarily and bring this to a negotiated end. Now, you can say that Russia will drive a hard bargain and that they will demand some horrible things from the Ukraine side, which they're not going to want to give up, to include land. And that's a fact. I don't dispute that in the least. For sure, that will happen. It will not be negotiated terms that are of benefit to the Ukraine side that they would like. But they are possible because there is a motivation and there is incentive for the Russian side to have a negotiated settlement. It would be much better for them to solidify what they have and then to stop having to bleed their own country dry and to stop having to spend so much of their money on bombs and missiles, and they can work on other parts of their economy. That makes sense. There's reasons why they have motivation. It's not out of any goodness of their heart or any kind of moral issue at all. It's just dollars and cents, or rubles in their case, I guess. So there is room to do that. But you watch when this money comes out, and I bet it will, there'll be a new demand after that, a new request, and it's not going to change the outcome on the battlefield. We'll see how it works out. Before we close out today, I want to touch on some news that was breaking just this afternoon, and that is former Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland has surprisingly resigned. Apparently, there had been an internal dispute where she was the acting number 3 in the State Department and was going to be elevated to the primary position, but apparently due to some internal issues, she was the leapfrog by a guy named Kurt Campbell, I believe it was. And so apparently she didn't want to be just another member of the State Department, so she resigned. And it was so ironic because Secretary Blinken, in a big flowery long statement on her departure, said Tory was. Let's see if I can read that there. But Tory's leadership on Ukraine, the diplomats and students of foreign policy will study for years to come. Well, I think in a strange kind of way, I kind of agree with him here, because they will be studying the stuff that she said for a long time. You may remember we actually showed a little bit of a clip on our show here a week or so ago. Back in 2014, Victoria Nuland was then, I think, the Deputy Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration, was in Kiev when there was a big uprising a lot of the people in Ukraine were trying to unseat the legally elected government because they were tilted toward Russia. They were pro-Russian and not pro-Western. And so many in the western part of the state decided they didn't like that. It doesn't matter who actually got elected. They didn't like them. So they wanted to have a revolt and basically a revolution to unseat them. Now, of course, America normally says we are for free and independent elections, and we are for people to make their own choices at the ballot box, not change governments by force. I know. I'm just saying what we say, not what we do. But even at that, you had Victoria Nuland on the ground fomenting the divisions between the two and supporting the group that was trying to oust the government, the legally elected government. And she was seen or caught in a phone conversation with the ambassador at the time, the U.S. ambassador, talking about some of the opposition figures who they thought should lead. Gary, do we still have that one up?
I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
In terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work. I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think.
Yeah. So you heard them just basically talking as though you're talking about monopoly pieces on a game board or something, or maybe chess pieces of like, yeah, let's move this one here. That's another country. Allegedly, this was an inspired issue that the people themselves were revolting. And yet here is Victoria Nuland openly deciding who's going to do what, who's going to be in, who's going to be out. And of course, it all worked out that way because we were behind the scenes pulling a lot of strings. And of course, that's how it worked out. So not a real positive thing for America or for democracy, for our country to be sending somebody like Victoria Nuland in to undo and to try to negotiate or determine what another country is going to do in their own country. You may also remember one of the bigger issues in the early part of this war here was that the Nord Stream pipeline that was owned by the Germans, which was an undersea pipeline that was getting oil and gas from Russia that was going to send it to Western Europe and to Germany itself. there was a big when the pipeline blew up under the North Sea. The initial statement from a lot of American sources was Russia did this. Russia blew it up because they wanted to sabotage. It doesn't make any sense of why Russia would blow up their own pipeline because they had control of the tap. So, of course, they're not going to blow up their own stuff. They don't need that to cut off the oil, but maybe others had motivation. Well, about a month before this war started, you had, again, Victoria Nuland at the center of this, said this.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
One way or another, that pipeline is not going to make it. And, well, we know it turned out to be the other way. And apparently Germany wasn't playing ball and didn't do the first way, which was just not use it. So seems like somebody else took some action here. We'll let history decide who that was, but pretty suspicious when you had her saying that, and then not long after that, that's exactly what happened. So yeah, they'll be studying that one too. I guess he's right on that. And then at the 2-year anniversary, Victoria Nuland goes on to say why, even though the war had not gone the way anybody wanted, even though, as we were telling you on the 2-year anniversary, the war can't be won and we should do a negotiated settlement, she's pushing for this.
Without sending a single U.S. soldier into combat and investing less than 1/10 of 1 year's defense budget of the United States, we have helped Ukraine destroy 50% of Russia's ground combat power, 50%, and 20% of its vaunted Black Sea fleet. Ukraine has taken off the battlefield 21 naval ships, 102 Russian aircraft, and 2,700 Russian tanks. By every measure, Ukraine's bravery and strength, its resilience, has made the United States safer.
No, that did not make the United States safer. In fact, you continue on with a war that can't be won with a nuclear power. You continue to keep alive the risk of miscalculation leading to nuclear escalation. That, my friend, does not keep America safe. That's not something I'm going to say, wow, this great diplomat is keeping our country safe. She's such a great one. No, she's not. Every action she keeps taking works against our national interest because it keeps us in trouble and it keeps things getting stirred up there. And that many of the things she said there were just flat outright fabrications. The thought that half of the Russian military had been destroyed is just fiction, just flat out fiction. Yes, they have endured a lot of losses, and I don't know if that number of 2,700 tanks is true or not. It could be. But as I talked about a minute ago, Russia has the industrial capacity to replace those losses and to fix a lot of the things that are down. So many of the whatever the number is that were damaged, are back on the field right now because they can do that, whereas the Ukraine side has very, very limited ability to do it, as we talked about here. But the idea that half of it has been destroyed is crazy. You even heard Nancy Pelosi talk about how the Russian army is bigger now than it was. You saw even Rubio acknowledges that things they're improving now, that they have this big manpower advantage in the industrial capacity. So even if some of that were partially true, it was never half of it. And if the army is bigger today, and if it's 3 times more Russians in there than were even around it on the first day of the war, by what measure can you say that's 50% loss? It's 300% bigger. So that's just fiction that she's saying there. And that's the kind of person that you're saying that you want people to study. No, you're not going to. And of course, as a capper, we've had this on before here, but it again bears repeating. She's trying to sell the war now because it's going to benefit you economically.
This is not just about Ukraine. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he will keep going. And autocrats and tyrants all around the world will take comfort and think that they too can chunk off a piece of their neighbor. And by the way, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. economy to make those weapons, including good-paying jobs in some 40 states across the United States.
It's a great deal, man. War is a great deal for us. keeps us well, it keeps a certain segment of our economy in lots of money. It doesn't do a whole lot for regular Americans, but hey, it does great for the people that pay her bills and to support some of the things she does. And we'll see where she ends up going after this. Wouldn't surprise me any if it's not some defense contractor somewhere, because there'll be no shortage of people lining up to give her a big payday coming out of this. But folks, if she was a good diplomat, a diplomat is not going to tell you that if Russia wins this, then tyrants all over the world will get the message and there'll be wars everywhere because of this. Anyone who's even halfway decent diplomat or a studier of foreign policy understands that every conflict, every situation in every part of the world is unique to that part of the world. Now, of course, they pay attention here, but I guarantee you that whether China, for example, moves on Taiwan has nothing to do with Russia and Ukraine. If Russia won big, if they completely dominated, or if they failed, has nothing to do with China's calculus, because China knows that their offensive operations, if they choose to do it, will depend on whether they think they can beat the Taiwanese side, not whether Russia could beat the Ukraine side. Those dynamics are different than these dynamics. Every place is like that. It's same with Iran. Iran's not going to make a decision about what it's going to do based on what Russia or China does. It's going to be based on what the balance of power in the region is on. That's what just a basic diplomatic understanding a person would say. But for her to say that either means that she's not a good diplomat, or that she's no diplomat at all, or that she doesn't care about reality and she's just saying whatever she thinks is necessary to get the outcome she wants. In any one of those scenarios, though, this is not someone that should be praised. We should be glad that she's out of our government and no longer in a position to influence events that work to our harm, because that's what the result of that is. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that that's going to benefit anybody. I'm sure there's probably 10 more just like her ready to step in. And probably that'll be the case, because that's just kind of what staffs our upper end elite right now, which is why I have such a problem with the so-called foreign policy elite in our country, because they are all in that same mode. That's why nobody bats an eye, because they hear that from all kinds of diplomats, not the least of which is the current Secretary of State, which we've illuminated here many times and will continue to do so. But I just wanted you to know that when you see that she's gone out today and she gets all this praise from the Secretary of State Blinken, just understand that should come with an asterisk, and at least you know the reality and the truth on that. Well, that's all we have for you today, folks, but you are not going to want to miss tomorrow's show. We have John Mearsheimer back again at 11 o'clock tomorrow, and he is always a great one to listen to. Man, he is in huge demand all over both the mainstream media as well as the social media, and for very good reason. And we are thrilled to have him back on our show tomorrow. Tune in at 11 a.m. there. Be sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends so that they'll get a chance to watch him tomorrow as well. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.